My name is Roy. I'm 38 years old. And today, I'm not here to comfort you. I'm not here to sugarcoat anything. I'm here because the truth hurts, and some of you are bleeding quietly while pretending you're fine. Let me say this slowly, because I need you to hear it. Signs your partner is tired of you. If you see these, know this deep down. They're already tired of you. Before you get angry at me, before you defend them, before you start explaining their behavior in your head, stop. Just stop. And before I go any further, if this hits even a little too close to home, like this video. Subscribe if you're tired of being lied to with sweet words. Comment where you're watching from, and share this with a friend, because someone you know is suffering in silence. Now listen. People don't wake up one day and suddenly stop loving you. They withdraw slowly, quietly, in pieces. And the problem is, you feel it before you admit it. You feel it in the pauses, in the delayed replies, in the way your phone stays silent unless you touch it first. Let me tell you the first sign. If they never call you unless you call them first, that's not coincidence. That's not being busy. That's not stress. That's effort disappearing. Love doesn't need reminders. Interest doesn't need alarms. When someone wants you, you don't have to chase their attention like a debt collector. And yet, here you are, checking your phone, wondering if today is the day they remember you exist. Second sign. If they don't text you unless you text first, that silence is not neutral. It's a message. People text what they care about. People reach out to what matters to them. Nobody forgets someone they miss. You keep telling yourself maybe they're just not a texting person, but somehow they manage to text everyone else just fine. You know that. You just don't want to say it out loud. Third sign. If you stop reaching out and they don't complain, they don't ask where you went, they don't check on you, understand this very clearly. They didn't notice your absence because emotionally you were already gone. That one hurts the most because it means you were carrying the relationship alone. You were the effort. You were the glue. You were the reminder. And when you step back and nothing collapses, that tells you everything. Fourth sign. You call them and they say, "I'm busy." Sometimes they don't answer at all. Sometimes they cut the call. And you sit there staring at your screen like an idiot, trying to convince yourself that you're overreacting. Let me be very clear with you. Nobody is too busy for what matters to them. Nobody. Busy people make time. Uninterested people make excuses. And the worst part, you accept those excuses because you're afraid of the truth. Fifth sign. You call them at night and they say they're tired. They say they want to sleep. They say their phone is dead. But minutes later, you call again and the phone is suddenly on another call. That's not confusion. That's not misunderstanding. That's replacement. And I know that word stings, but I didn't come here to lie to you. Here's the part nobody wants to tell you. When someone is tired of you, they don't announce it. They slowly remove you from their priority list and hope you won't notice. They hope you'll keep trying. They hope you'll keep adjusting. They hope you'll keep blaming yourself. And you do. You tell yourself you're asking for too much. You tell yourself you're being needy. You tell yourself you should be more patient. No, you're not asking for too much. You're asking the wrong person. Let me say something that may anger you. Sometimes people don't change. They just stop pretending. And what hurts the most isn't that they got tired of you. It's that you kept lowering yourself to keep them. If you're watching this and your chest feels tight right now, that's because you recognize the pattern. You didn't imagine it. You didn't exaggerate it. You didn't ruin anything. You noticed the truth and you tried to silence it. This is only the beginning. In the next part, I'm going to talk about why you ignore these signs, why you stay,
and why walking away feels harder than being disrespected. And it's going to hurt more than this. If you're still here, like the video, subscribe, comment where you're watching from, and share this with someone who
And if you're
keeps
still
making
here, then
excuses for
part
someone
one
who
didn't
stopped
just touch
choosing
you,
them.
it exposed something you've been trying to bury. Part two is where it gets uncomfortable, because now we stop talking about them and we start talking about you. You see the signs, you feel the distance, you sense the withdrawal. So why do you stay? Why do you keep checking your phone? Why do you keep making excuses for behavior that would hurt you if it came from anyone else? Why do you keep hoping for effort from someone who has already decided to stop trying? The truth is ugly. You stay because leaving would force you to accept that you were giving more than you were receiving. You stay because admitting the truth feels like admitting failure. You stay because you're afraid that if you walk away, it means you weren't enough. Let me tell you something that might shatter you a little. Someone else's inability to love you properly does not mean that you are unlovable, but staying where you are not valued teaches your mind the opposite. You start negotiating with yourself. You tell yourself, maybe I'm too emotional, maybe I'm expecting too much, maybe I should just be grateful they're still around. That's how self-respect erodes, quietly, politely, with reasons. You don't wake up one day with no standards. You lose them one excuse at a time. And every time you accept less, your body remembers. Your chest tightens, your stomach drops, your sleep gets lighter. That's not love anxiety. That's your intuition screaming while you keep telling it to shut up. You weren't crazy for noticing the change. You weren't insecure for feeling the distance. You weren't dramatic for wanting consistency. You were responding to neglect. Here's what people don't understand about being tired of someone. It doesn't always look like anger. It doesn't always look like fights. Sometimes it looks like indifference. Indifference is worse. Indifference is when they don't argue anymore because you're not worth the effort. Indifference is when your silence doesn't scare them. Indifference is when your presence no longer changes their mood. And still, you stay. You tell yourself stories. They're just going through something. They're stressed. They'll come back around. But listen to me carefully. People don't pull away from what they're afraid to lose. They pull away from what they believe will stay no matter how little they give. And that's the part that should make you angry. Not at them, at yourself. Because somewhere along the way, you taught them that your needs were optional. You taught them that you'd wait. You taught them that you'd chase. You taught them that your love was unconditional, even when the disrespect wasn't. And now you're surprised they stopped showing up? Let me ask you a question, and don't lie to yourself. When was the last time they checked on you without being prompted? When was the last time they called just to hear your voice? When was the last time they made you feel chosen instead of tolerated? If you have to think too hard, that's your answer. Another painful truth. When someone is tired of you, they don't want closure. They want convenience. They want you available without commitment, present without effort, loyal without accountability. And if you keep giving that to them, they will take it. Not because they're evil, but because people take what is freely offered without cost. And right now, you're offering your dignity at a discount. I know you're scared. You're scared that if you stop trying, it's really over. You're scared that silence means finality. You're scared that walking away confirms what you don't want to believe. But let me tell you something harder. It's already over in the way you want it to be. You're just the last one to accept it. And that doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. But staying won't revive something that died from neglect. Begging won't resurrect effort. Patience won't create desire. You cannot love someone into loving you back. And if that sentence hurts, it's because you've been trying. Part 2 isn't about blaming you, it's about waking you up. Because the longer you stay where you're not valued, the more you normalize the absence of care. You start thinking love is supposed to feel like anxiety, like waiting, like uncertainty. It's not. Love feels steady. Love feels responsive. Love doesn't leave you guessing every night. If you have to keep convincing yourself you matter, you don't.
And I'm not saying that to hurt you. I'm saying it because someone has to be honest with you. In the next part, we're going to talk about what happens when you finally stop chasing, why silence works differently when it comes from self-respect, and why pulling your energy back feels terrifying but changes everything. If this part made you uncomfortable, that means it's working. Like the video, subscribe, comment where you're watching from, and share this with someone who keeps loving someone who stopped choosing them.
And now we're at the part most people never reach, because this is where the illusion finally starts to crack. Part 3 is about what happens when you stop chasing. Not blocking, not unfollowing, not dramatic exits, not long speeches. Just stopping. And I need you to understand something before we go any further. Stopping doesn't mean you don't care. Stopping means you're done bleeding in silence. You've been conditioned to believe that effort equals love, that if you try harder, explain better, stay patient longer, something will change. But effort without reciprocity is self-abandonment. Let that sit for a moment. Every time you text first, every time you call after being ignored, every time you check in when they haven't checked on you in days, you are teaching them a lesson. And the lesson is this: I will stay even when you do nothing. So what happens when you stop? At first, nothing. And that's the part that makes people panic. You stop texting, you stop calling, you stop reminding them you exist. And the silence doesn't immediately shake them. It doesn't scare them. It doesn't wake them up. And your mind starts screaming, see, they never cared. But listen carefully. Silence doesn't work instantly. Silence works internally first. Because now there's no distraction, no chasing, no fixing, no performing. There's just the truth. And the truth feels unbearable at first. You start replaying memories. You start romanticizing the beginning. You start questioning your decision. That's withdrawal. You weren't addicted to them. You were addicted to the hope. And hope is dangerous when it's the only thing holding a relationship together. Here's what nobody tells you. When you stop chasing, one of two things happens. Either they notice or you do. If they notice, it's not because they suddenly became a better person. It's because the convenience disappeared. They feel the absence of access. They feel the shift in energy. They feel the loss of control. And that's when messages start coming in. Casual, vague, curious. Hey, are you okay? You've been quiet. Not because they miss you, but because they feel you slipping. And that's where people mess up. They respond too fast, too eager, too grateful, and the cycle resets. But if you don't respond, or you respond without emotion, without explanation, without chasing, something changes. Not in them, in you. You realize how much peace exists without constant anxiety. You realize how much energy you were pouring into someone who wasn't matching it. You realize how loud the silence was because you were doing all the talking. And here's the painful part. Sometimes they don't reach out at all. And that truth will punch you in the chest. Because now there's no confusion, no guessing, no maybe, just clarity. And clarity hurts more than uncertainty, but it heals faster. You start seeing things clearly. You notice how one-sided it was, how often you were waiting, how often you were adjusting. And slowly, painfully, you accept something you didn't want to admit. You were loving someone who had already emotionally left. That realization doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with grief. Grief for what you hoped it would be. Grief for the version of them you believed in. Grief for the time you spent trying to save something alone. And this is where anger finally shows up. Not explosive anger, quiet anger. The kind that asks, why did I allow this? Why did I stay after the signs were clear?
Why did I keep explaining my worth to someone committed to misunderstanding it? Why did I confuse potential with reality? This anger isn't destructive, it's protective. Because now you're awake. You stop romanticizing neglect. You stop calling breadcrumbs effort. You stop mistaking silence for mystery. And something inside you shifts. You stop wanting them back and start wanting yourself back. And that scares you because now you can't unsee what you've seen. You can't go back to chasing without knowing what it costs you. Part 3 is where the power dynamic changes. Not because you won, but because you finally stopped losing yourself. In the next part, we're going to talk about why they react when you pull back, why their sudden interest doesn't mean growth, and why going back at this stage is the most dangerous mistake you can make. If this part made your chest tight, that's normal.
And now we're at the part that traps most people back into the same pain they just escaped. Part 4 is about their reaction when you pull back, and why it confuses you enough to make you doubt everything you've just learned. Because here's what happens next. You stop chasing. You stop initiating. You stop explaining. You stop bending. And suddenly, they notice. Not immediately, not dramatically, but subtly. A text shows up, a call you weren't expecting, a random check-in, and your heart jumps. You tell yourself, see, they do care. Maybe they just needed space. Maybe this is the turning point. No. Listen to me carefully, because this is where people fall back into the fire. Attention is not intention. Someone noticing your absence is not the same as someone choosing you. When you pull back, you disrupt a pattern, and people react to disruption instinctively, not lovingly. They feel the shift in access. They feel the loss of control. They feel the discomfort of not being able to reach you whenever they want. That reaction is about them, not about you. And the most dangerous thing you can do at this stage is mistake curiosity for commitment. They might sound warmer. They might sound nostalgic. They might even sound emotional. But pay attention to what doesn't change. They still don't make plans. They still don't show consistency. They still don't invest effort. They just want reassurance that you're still there, because knowing you're still available makes them comfortable again. And if you rush back, if you respond with relief instead of boundaries, you teach them something new. I'll come back the moment you show the slightest amount of interest. And then everything resets. You're back to waiting, back to hoping, back to guessing. That's why part 4 hurts so much, because it forces you to confront this truth. Someone can miss your presence without missing the responsibility of treating you right. Someone can want access to you without wanting to show up for you. Someone can enjoy your attention without valuing your heart. And if that sentence stings, it's because you've lived it. You've mistaken emotional breadcrumbs for effort. You've mistaken words for action. You've mistaken reaction for change. Real change doesn't announce itself. It proves itself over time. Consistency is the only apology that matters. Effort is the only explanation that counts. And if you don't see that, you don't negotiate. You don't argue. You don't explain. You observe. Because here's the thing nobody prepares you for. When you finally stop chasing, you start seeing clearly. You notice how reactive they are, how vague their words sound, how empty the promises feel. And you realize something terrifying. You don't trust them anymore. Not because they're evil, but because they taught you inconsistency. And trust cannot exist where predictability is missing. Part 4 is where you learn restraint. You learn not to respond out of hope. You learn not to confuse attention with accountability. You learn not to trade progress for familiarity. This is where self-respect becomes action,
not a concept. And yes, it hurts, because a part of you still wants the old story to be true. A part of you still wants them to fight for you. A part of you still wants validation. But another part, a quieter, stronger part, knows better now. That part remembers the nights you waited, the calls that never came, the excuses that piled up. That part asks one simple question: has anything actually changed? And if the answer is no, then the decision becomes clear. Not easy, but clear. In the next part, we're going to talk about why walking away feels like failure, why your ego fights it harder than your heart ever did, and why choosing yourself feels lonelier before it feels peaceful. If you're still here, it means you're stronger than you think. Like the video, subscribe, comment where you're watching from, and share this with someone who keeps confusing attention with love. My name is Roy. I'm 38 years old. And now we're at the part that feels like failure, even though it's actually freedom. Part 5 is about why walking away hurts more than staying, and why your ego fights it harder than your heart ever did. Because staying feels familiar. Staying feels predictable. Staying feels like at least you still have something. Walking away feels like loss, like defeat, like admitting that what you invested in didn't become what you hoped. And your ego hates that. Your ego doesn't care about peace. Your ego cares about being right. Your ego wants the story to end with them realizing what they lost, begging to come back, and validating everything you endured. But healing doesn't work like that. Healing is quiet. Healing is lonely. Healing is choosing yourself without applause. And that's why people go back. Not because they're weak, but because their identity got attached to being needed. You weren't just loving them, you were proving something to yourself, that you're loyal, that you're patient, that you don't give up easily. And walking away feels like betraying that identity.
But let me tell you something that might change how you see this. Endurance is not a virtue when it's costing you your dignity. You don't get points for suffering longer. You don't win by tolerating neglect. You don't become noble by shrinking yourself to fit into someone's indifference. Staying in a situation that drains you doesn't make you strong. It makes you tired. And deep down, you know that. You know how heavy it feels to wake up every day bracing for disappointment. You know how exhausting it is to replay conversations in your head, wondering what you could have said differently. You know how much energy it takes to love someone who makes you feel optional. But here's the hardest part to accept. Walking away means accepting that they may never understand what they lost. They may never apologize. They may never take accountability. They may never change. And your ego screams, that's not fair. You want justice, you want acknowledgement, you want closure. But closure doesn't come from them. Closure comes from realizing that someone's inability to choose you consistently is all the information you need. You don't walk away because you stopped loving them. You walk away because you started loving yourself more. And that shift, that's terrifying. Because now you can't hide behind effort anymore. You can't say, at least I tried. Now you have to sit with the quiet truth that trying harder was never the solution. The solution was choosing differently. And choosing yourself feels lonely at first. There's silence, there's space, there's no one to text out of habit. And in that emptiness, you meet yourself again. The version of you that existed before anxiety became normal, before checking your phone was the first thing you did in the morning, before your mood depended on someone else's availability. That version is still there, just buried. Part 5 is where grief peaks. You grieve the future you imagined. You grieve the version of them you hoped they'd become. You grieve the time you can't get back. And grief hurts more than anger. But grief also cleanses.
Because once you grieve honestly, you stop bargaining, you stop negotiating, you stop waiting. You accept. And acceptance doesn't mean approval, it means release. In the next part, we're going to talk about what real healing actually looks like, why peace feels boring at first, and how you rebuild yourself without needing anyone to notice. If this part feels heavy, that's okay. You're carrying less than you were before. Like the video, subscribe, comment where you're watching from, and share this with someone who thinks walking away means losing. And now we're at the part nobody prepares you for, what healing actually looks like when no one is watching. Part 6 is not loud. It doesn't feel powerful at first. It doesn't come with revenge or victory speeches or dramatic realizations. It feels empty. Because for the first time in a long time, you're not reacting to anyone. You wake up and there's no message to decode, no silence to interpret, no mood swing tied to someone else's availability. And that calm, it scares you. Because chaos had become familiar, anxiety had become routine, waiting had become your identity. You don't realize how addicted you were to emotional intensity until it disappears. At first, peace feels boring, too quiet, too still. You catch yourself reaching for your phone out of habit. You almost text them not because you miss them, but because your nervous system is craving the old pattern. That's withdrawal. You're not missing them, you're missing the rhythm of pain you learned to live with. And this is where people relapse. They mistake discomfort for regret. They mistake silence for loneliness. They mistake peace for emptiness. But listen to me carefully. Peace feels boring when you've been surviving chaos. Your body doesn't trust calm yet. Your mind doesn't know what to do without constant stimulation. So it tells you lies. It tells you maybe you overreacted. Maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe you should reach out. No, that's your nervous system begging for familiarity, not love. Healing doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like relearning how to breathe without pain. Slowly, things start to change. You sleep deeper. Your thoughts stop racing at night. Your chest doesn't tighten every time your phone lights up. You start noticing how much energy you actually have when you're not pouring it into someone who isn't giving back. And here's the part that hits hard. You realize how much of yourself you abandoned to keep them comfortable. The hobbies you dropped, the friendships you neglected, the boundaries you ignored. Healing means facing that loss. Not blaming yourself, but forgiving yourself. You did the best you could with the awareness you had at the time. You stayed because you hoped. You hoped because you cared. That doesn't make you stupid, it makes you human. But now you know better. So you move differently. You stop explaining yourself to people who misunderstand you on purpose. You stop overgiving to prove your worth. You stop tolerating inconsistency in the name of love. Your standards rise, not out of arrogance, but out of self-protection. And yes, this version of you is quieter. You don't overshare anymore. You don't chase closure. You don't seek validation. You observe. You choose. You walk away early. And some people won't like that. They'll say you changed. They'll say you became cold. They'll say you're distant. What they really mean is you're no longer accessible without effort. And that's not bitterness. That's growth.
Part 6 is where you stop romanticizing potential and start honoring reality. You no longer fall for words without action. You no longer invest in confusion. You no longer stay where clarity is missing. And something unexpected happens. You feel lighter. Not happy all the time, not healed completely, but grounded. You start building a life that doesn't revolve around waiting. You fill your days with things that nourish you instead of drain you. You become present again. And one day, without realizing when it happened, you stop thinking about them. Not because you forced yourself to forget, but because your life finally has space for something else. Part 6 is where you reclaim your time. In the next part, we're going to talk about why people from your past sometimes resurface when you've healed, why that test is dangerous, and how to recognize whether it's growth or another cycle waiting to begin. If you've made it this far, you're doing the hardest work there is. Like the video, subscribe, comment where you're watching from, and share this with someone who thinks healing is supposed to feel exciting. My name is Roy. I'm 38 years old, and this was part 6. Part 7 is about when they come back. Because sometimes, just when you finally feel steady, just when your chest isn't tight anymore, just when you've stopped checking your phone, they reappear. Not loudly, not dramatically, but just enough to shake you. A message, a reaction to a story, a "hey, how have you been?" A casual check-in that pretends nothing ever happened, and your heart skips. Not because you want them back, but because your nervous system remembers. Your body remembers the pain. Your mind remembers the hope. Your ego remembers the unfinished story. And suddenly, everything you worked through feels fragile. Let me tell you the truth about this moment. This is not destiny. This is not a sign. This is not proof of change. This is familiarity knocking. People often come back when they sense you've detached, when your energy shifts, when you're no longer chasing, waiting, or bleeding for them. Not because they suddenly realized your worth, but because they felt the loss of access. And that distinction matters more than you think. If someone comes back without accountability, without consistency, without changed behavior, they didn't come back to love you. They came back to see if you're still available. And this is where people break their own hearts again. They respond too fast. They soften too quickly. They reopen doors without checking what's on the other side. They want to believe the pain meant something, that the struggle was a setup for reunion, that suffering will finally be rewarded. But listen to me. Pain is not a down payment for love. Just because you endured something doesn't mean you're owed a better version of the same person. And here's the hardest pill to swallow. Someone can miss you and still not be capable of loving you properly. Missing you doesn't equal growth. Reaching out doesn't equal remorse. Nostalgia doesn't equal readiness. Words are easy when loneliness hits. Change is hard when accountability is required. So when they come back, don't listen to what they say. Watch what they do. Do they acknowledge the hurt they caused without minimizing it? Do they show consistent effort over time without being prompted? Do they respect your boundaries without pushing them? If not, then this isn't a second chance. It's a loop. And loops exist to teach lessons you didn't finish learning. Part 7 is where self-respect becomes non-negotiable. You don't respond from emotion, you respond from clarity. Or sometimes, you don't respond at all. And no, that doesn't make you cruel. It makes you conscious. Because you're not here to repeat cycles, you're here to break them. And breaking a cycle often means disappointing someone who benefited from you staying the same. That's okay. You don't owe access to someone who didn't protect your heart. You don't owe explanations to someone who ignored your pain. You don't owe availability to someone who treated you like an option. And this realization, it hurts. Because part of you still wishes they were different, still wishes the story could end softly, still wishes the past cost you so much. But the stronger part of you knows better now. Part 7 is where you choose discernment over desire. And that choice, that's growth. In the next part, we're going to talk about who you become after all of this, how your standards change, and why your future relationships will never look the same again. If this part made your heart race, you're not alone. Like the video, subscribe, comment where you're watching from, and share this with someone who thinks healing is supposed to feel all exciting. Part 8 is about who you become after the pain stops running your life. Because once you've been ignored, minimized, made to feel optional, you don't come out the same person. And that's not a bad thing. You stop romanticizing inconsistency. You stop chasing chemistry without character. You stop mistaking intensity for intimacy. Your standards change, not because you became bitter, but because you became aware. You don't need constant reassurance anymore. You don't need daily texts to feel secure. You don't need to be chosen loudly. What you need now is consistency. You start paying attention to patterns instead of promises. You watch how people show up when it's inconvenient. You notice how they handle silence, stress, and responsibility. And this version of you, it scares some people. Because you no longer over-explain. You no longer beg for clarity. You no longer stay where effort is conditional. You ask fewer questions. You make quicker decisions. Not because you don't care, but because you care about yourself. And here's something no one talks about. After you've been hurt deeply, peace can feel unfamiliar. You might even question it. You might think, why doesn't this feel intense? Why isn't my heart racing? Why does this feel calm? That's not boredom. That's safety. Intensity comes from uncertainty. Peace comes from reliability. And once you experience peace, you realize how exhausting your old relationships were. You were performing, you were proving, you were waiting. Now, you're living. You don't force connections anymore. You let people reveal themselves. And when they do, you believe them the first time. You don't need to be harsh. You don't need to be cold. You just need to be clear. Clear about what you accept. Clear about what you won't tolerate. Clear about what you deserve. And yes, this means fewer people get access to you. But the ones who do, they meet the real you. Not the anxious version, not the overgiving version, not the version afraid to be left. They meet someone grounded. And grounded people don't chase, they choose. Part 8 is where you stop asking, why wasn't I enough? And start asking, why did I stay when it wasn't enough? That question changes everything. You realize the pain didn't break you, it refined you. It taught you boundaries, it taught you discernment, it taught you patience with yourself. And one day you look back at the person you were during that relationship and you don't feel shame, you feel compassion, because they didn't know what you know now. Part 8 is where forgiveness enters, not for them, but for yourself. Forgiveness for staying too long, forgiveness for hoping too hard, forgiveness for loving deeply. And when you forgive yourself, the weight finally lifts. In the next part, we're going to talk about the final truth, why not everyone is meant to go with you into the next chapter, and how to close this story without anger, without revenge, and without regret. If you've made it this far, you've changed more than you realize. And now we're at the part where the story finally stops hurting. Not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer controls you. Part 9 is about acceptance without bitterness. This is the stage people misunderstand the most. They think acceptance means you're okay with what happened. They think it means you excuse the behavior. They think it means you forgot the pain. No, acceptance means you stop fighting reality. You stop replaying conversations in your head, wishing you'd said something different. You stop imagining alternative endings. You stop asking what-if questions that have no answers. You accept that they showed you exactly who they were, and you finally believe them. And that belief, that's freedom. You don't need revenge. You don't need closure from their mouth. You don't need them to understand. Because here's the truth that takes time to sink in. Someone's inability to love you properly is not a debt they owe you repayment for. It's just information. Painful information, but useful. You see, anger keeps you tied. Hope keeps you stuck. But acceptance releases you. And acceptance doesn't come all at once. It comes in waves.
One day you're calm, the next day a memory hits you out of nowhere. A song, a place, a random moment. And for a second, the ache returns, but it doesn't swallow you anymore. You feel it and you let it pass. That's growth. You don't suppress the pain. You don't dramatize it. You don't build an identity around it. You let it move through you without letting it define you. And something incredible happens here. You stop needing to be understood by someone who never tried to understand you in the first place. You stop explaining yourself to ghosts. You stop holding space for someone who couldn't hold space for you. You begin to reclaim your energy fully. Your mornings feel lighter, your thoughts feel clearer again. Your laughter feels real again. Not forced, not distracted, real. You start trusting yourself again. That's a big one, because heartbreak doesn't just break trust with others, it breaks trust with yourself. You questioned your judgment, your instincts, your worth. But now, slowly, you rebuild that trust. You learned that noticing the signs wasn't weakness, it was awareness. You learned that walking away wasn't giving up, it was choosing life.
And here's something important. You don't become cold. You become selective. You still love deeply. You still care. You still open your heart. But you don't open it blindly. You require effort. You require consistency. You require respect. And anyone who can't meet you there doesn't get access. Not out of punishment, out of self-preservation. Part 9 is where you stop telling this story as a wound and start telling it as a lesson. You stop saying, I was hurt, and start saying, I learned. And learning changes you permanently. You don't chase people who pull away. You don't beg for clarity. You don't sit in confusion hoping it turns into commitment. You walk away early, calmly, without needing to announce it, because peace has become your priority. And peace doesn't argue. It doesn't convince. It doesn't wait. It chooses. In the final part, we're going to close this chapter completely. Not with anger, not with sadness, but with truth. If you're still here, you've done deep work. Like the video, subscribe, comment where you're watching from, and share this with someone who needs permission to finally let go. And this is the last part, not because the pain wasn't real, not because the story didn't matter, but because it no longer owns you. Part 10 is where everything settles, not in noise, not in victory, but in truth. You don't wake up one day and suddenly feel healed. You wake up one day and realize you're no longer waiting. You're no longer hoping for a message. You're no longer replaying old moments. You're no longer wondering if they'll come back. You've moved on quietly. And that's the most powerful kind of moving on. There's no announcement, no long posts, no explanations. Just a shift. You stop checking. You stop comparing. You stop measuring your worth by how someone else treated you. And here's the truth that closes this chapter. They didn't ruin you. They revealed you. They revealed your capacity to love deeply. They revealed your tolerance. They revealed how much you were willing to give. And now you know what to protect. You don't hate them. You don't resent them. You don't wish them harm. You simply don't wish them access. That's not bitterness. That's boundaries. You understand now that not everyone who enters your life is meant to stay. Some people come to teach you where your limits are. Some come to show you what you will never accept again. And that lesson, it was expensive. It cost you sleep. It cost you peace. It cost you parts of yourself. But it also gave you clarity. You no longer tolerate being an option. You no longer beg for effort. You no longer explain your value. You walk away the first time consistency disappears. Not angrily, not dramatically, calmly. Because now you know. Love that requires you to shrink is not love. Attention without commitment is not care. And effort that only comes when you pull away is not enough. You stop asking, why wasn't I enough? And you start knowing,
I stayed too long where I wasn't valued. That realization doesn't break you, it frees you. You become quieter, stronger, more grounded. You don't rush connections anymore. You don't fill silence with people. You don't fear being alone. Because loneliness taught you something important. Being alone is better than being with someone who makes you feel invisible. And when someone new comes into your life, you don't give them access to your heart immediately. You watch, you observe, you let time speak. And if they show up consistently, honestly, respectfully, then you open the door. If they don't, you don't chase them out. You simply don't invite them in. That's maturity. This is how the story ends. Not with revenge, not with regret, but with self-respect. You don't need closure from them. You close the door yourself. And if there's one thing I want you to remember, it's this. The signs were never there to hurt you. They were there to wake you up. And now, you're awake. If you made it to the end, like the video, subscribe, comment where you're watching from, and share this with someone who's still waiting for someone who already left emotionally. My name is Roy. I'm 38 years old. And this is where the pain ends and your life continues.